The news that broke that evening felt like a point-blank shot. Freddie Mercury is dead. Millions of people wept, lit candles, and sang Bohemian Rhapsody on the streets of cold cities. They mourned the loss of the greatest showman in history, the god of rock, the man who held the whole world in the palm of his hand. But none of them, not the fans, not the journalists, not even many in his inner circle, knew the terrible truth. The truth was, they were mourning a man who was never born. Freddie Mercury did not die in 1991, because Freddie Mercury was a hallucination, a perfectly constructed myth, armor. The real murder happened long before that. It happened quietly, without witnesses, without obituaries, and without grieving crowds. It was a cold-blooded, calculated, and brutal crime committed with surgical precision. The victim did not resist. The victim laid himself upon the altar. The name of this victim was Farrokh Bulsara, and the killer was the very man you are used to seeing in a crown and ermine cape. You think you know the history of Queen? You've seen the movie, you've read the biographies, you know every note by heart, but you missed the main thing. You missed the moment when a shy boy with a bad overbite took an invisible knife and methodically began to carve out everything human in him to make room for a deity. Ask yourself a question. What are you willing to do for greatness? Are you willing to give up your name, your family, your blood, the very essence of who you are? Freddie didn't make this choice for fame. That is the biggest lie you believe. He didn't do it for money, and he didn't do it for applause. He did it for survival, because Farrokh Bulsara was doomed. Farrokh Bulsara was an outcast. Farrokh Bulsara was a mistake of nature, or at least, that is exactly how he saw himself every morning when he approached the mirror. Look closely at any photo of early Freddie. What do you see? Charisma? Energy? No. Look closer. You will see a hand. His right hand, constantly, obsessively, almost reflexively, flying up to his face. Why? To cover his mouth. This movement is the prosecution's main witness. It is the evidence he was never able to destroy. Behind this hand lay his greatest pain and his greatest curse. Polyodontia, a genetic anomaly. 4 extra teeth in the upper jaw. They pushed the front incisors forward, creating that famous, yet hated grin. At St. Peter's School in Panchgani, India, cruel children gave him a nickname. They called him Bucky. Every word thrown at his back was like the crack of a whip. Hey Bucky, can you open a tin can with your teeth? Laughter, humiliation, loneliness. You think these are just childhood complexes? That it passes with age? You are mistaken. It is a poison that enters the blood and stays there forever. Farrokh hated his reflection. He hated those teeth. He considered himself a freak. But the paradox was that this very deformity created a unique resonance in his skull. It was this error in the architecture of his jaw that gave his voice that unearthly 4-octave range. Nature played a cruel joke on him. She gave him a divine instrument, packaged in a form he despised. And here begins the real conflict. Farrokh wanted to sing, but Farrokh couldn't go on stage, because Farrokh was a frightened little immigrant who was ashamed to even smile. What do you do when you are trapped in a body that doesn't belong to you? What do you do when your name sounds like a spell in a foreign tongue, eliciting only bewilderment and disdain from the British? Farrokh. This name dragged him down like an anchor. It smelled of the spices of Zanzibar. It smelled of the dust of India. It smelled of everything he was so desperately trying to run from. It reminded him that he was an alien, a Parsi, a Zoroastrian, not British, a second-class citizen in an empire that was already crumbling. And then he made a decision. If the world does not accept Farrokh Bulsara, then Farrokh Bulsara must disappear. He must be erased, annulled. This wasn't just a change of stage name. Elton John changed his name, but remained Reginald Dwight inside. David Bowie changed masks, but always knew who he was. With Freddie, It was different. It was a total, uncompromising amputation of the past. He began to create a legend about himself, layer by layer, lie by lie. When journalists asked him about Zanzibar, he pretended not to understand the question. I'm Persian? Oh no, darling, I'm British to the bone. He lied to his friends' faces. He lied to his lovers. He forbade the mention of his real name in his presence. It was taboo. It was a dead word. To utter Farrokh in his presence was tantamount to bringing a corpse to a party. But the scariest part of this story isn't that he killed his past. The scariest part is what he did to his present. Have you ever wondered why he was so flamboyant on stage? Why the crazy costumes, the leotards, the feathers, the makeup? You think it was freedom? No, it was a cage. It was the shiniest, most luxurious, loudest prison in the world. The brighter Freddie Mercury shone, the deeper the frightened boy with the overbite retreated into the shadows. Every exit onto the stage was an act of exorcism. He went out to 100,000 people to get from them the love he couldn't give himself. He fed on their adoration because inside him was a black hole that was impossible to fill. And here we come to the moment that changes everything. The moment when logic breaks. He got money. A lot of money. Millions of pounds. He could buy any house, any car, any person. And he could buy himself a new face. The best surgeons in London and Switzerland were ready to fix his bite in a couple of hours. One surgery. A simple, routine procedure. And Bucky would disappear forever. He would become perfect, beautiful, the way he dreamed of being all his life. But he didn't do it. Why? Here lies a secret that makes the blood run cold. He was convinced that his gift, his voice, lived in this very deformity. He believed in a mystical connection between his extra teeth and his talent. If I fix my teeth, I'll lose my voice, he said. Think about that. He chose to remain a freak in his own eyes, to remain a god in yours. It was a lifelong sacrifice. He wore his face like a scar, a reminder that magic must be paid for. He hated his teeth, but he guarded them like the apple of his eye. Because without them, Freddie Mercury might disappear, and only Farrokh would remain. And the return of Farrokh was more terrifying to him than death. Do you still think this is a success story? No. It is the story of how a man became a hostage to his own creation. Freddie Mercury became Frankenstein's monster, consuming his creator. He became so powerful, so huge, that there was simply no room left for the ordinary human inside. Friends recalled how his eyes changed when the cameras turned off. As soon as he crossed the threshold of his Garden Lodge mansion, that golden dust fell away, and in the mirror he appeared again, lonely, vulnerable, covering his mouth with his hand when laughing at a joke on TV. In an empty house, full of antiques and cats, Freddie Mercury vanished, and in his place stood the ghost of a murdered boy who could never find his way home. But the most amazing thing about this tragedy is that it was this internal conflict, this eternal war between Farrokh and Freddie, that gave us the music we know. Every song of his is a cry for help. Every ballad is an attempt to explain how lonely it is to be a god. The Great Pretender isn't just a cover, it's his confession. Oh yes, I'm the Great Pretender, drifting in a world of my own. He sang the truth, but we were too blinded by the glitter of his costumes to hear it. We applauded the mask, not noticing the tears beneath it. We worshipped the character, while the man inside slowly burned from the impossibility of being himself. And here you stand, before the fact. The legend you love is built on the bones of a child. But that child didn't vanish without a trace. He left clues. He hid them in song lyrics, in sad glances, in the way he frantically clutched the microphone stand, as if it were the only lifebuoy in an ocean of lies. Freddie Mercury killed Farrokh Bulsara to become immortal. But ask yourself honestly, was it worth it? Was greatness worth living a life in someone else's skin, afraid of your own reflection? The answer to this question is known only to the silence that fell in his bedroom when the music ended. The silence in which Farrokh could finally speak. But there was no one left to listen to him. London Heathrow Airport, April 11th, 1964. 4:42 p.m. The sky, the color of dirty concrete, presses down on his shoulders. The air smells of kerosene, dampness, and someone else's despair. A thin, angular teenager walks out of the terminal with a suitcase containing his entire past life. His name is Farrokh. He is 17 years old, and he is shivering, but not from the cold, although the London wind chills to the bone after the sultry sun of Zanzibar. He is shivering from a fear that grips his throat with an icy hand. You think he fled to London for a dream? You think he came to conquer Mount Olympus of music? That is a lie. He came so he wouldn't die, literally. Behind him, on the Spice Island, was a bloody revolution, corpses on the streets, and an order to kill Arabs and Indians. But Farrokh doesn't know yet that by escaping one war, he has just landed on the battlefield of another. And this war will not be for territory, but for his soul. First night in a Feltham, a suburb of London. 22 Gladstone Avenue. Cramped. Alien smells. His parents, Bomi and Jer, try to save face by arranging the surviving family heirlooms on the mantelpiece of a cheap rental. They pray to Asura Mazda, giving thanks for their salvation. But Farrokh looks out the window at the gray brick walls and realizes he has landed in hell. In Zanzibar, he was the son of a respected official. He lived in abundance. He had servants. Here, in 60s London, he is nobody. Worse than nobody. He is a Paki. He heard that word on his very first day. It sounded like spit. The local teenagers didn't know geography. They didn't care that he was Parsi, not Pakistani. To them, he was just another dark-skinned immigrant who had overrun their country. And here arises the question that tormented him on sleepless nights. How do you make these people, who look at you like dirt, love you? How do you turn contempt into adoration? The answer seemed impossible, but Farrokh found it, and this answer was terrifying. You need to stop being yourself. You need to kill the victim inside you. You think he became Freddie immediately? No. It was a painful, slow transformation, like being flayed alive. He enrolled in Isleworth Polytechnic, then Ealing Art College, seemingly the perfect place for a creative nature. But it was there that his insecurities bloomed in full color. All around were stylish, confident British hipsters, children of swinging London. They wore corduroy, listened to The Who, and discussed art with casual ease. And Farrokh wore clothes bought by his mom at a sale and was ashamed to open his mouth. Remember that dagger from part 1? The hand at the face. In college, this gesture became his second nature. He laughed into his fist. He spoke, barely parting his lips. He was a shadow. But in this shadow, a plan was born. He began to observe. He scanned the behavior of popular students like a predator scans prey. How do they walk? How do they hold a cigarette? How do they flip their hair? He copied them. He started spending his last money on clothes from the flea market in Kensington. He bought vintage scarves, strange jackets, platform shoes. He tried them on in front of the mirror in his tiny room, and for a second, just for a second, Farrokh disappeared. Someone else appeared in his place. Someone dangerous. Someone who didn't give a damn about the crowd's opinion. But as soon as he went outside, the magic dissipated. One sideways glance, one whisper behind his back, and he shrank into a ball again. You think he was confident? An absolute lie. His arrogance, which would later become legendary, was a protective shell. The more afraid he was, the higher he stuck his nose in the air. It was brilliant acting, where the stake was his psyche. And then an event occurs that flips everything. A simple accident? A paperwork error? A slip of the tongue? No. It was a conscious choice. At college, someone couldn't pronounce his name. Fred? And he didn't correct them. He froze. Dead silence. Thousands of thoughts raced through his head. Farrokh is a refugee. Farrokh is Bucky. Farrokh is the boy who gets beaten. But Freddie? Freddie sounded British. Freddie sounded safe. Freddie could be anyone. Yes, he said, and his voice didn't even tremble. Call me Freddie. In that moment, in a dusty art college classroom, he cut the umbilical cord, connecting him to the Bulsara lineage. He thought it was just convenience. But in reality, he had signed a contract with the devil. But a lie requires fuel. Having become Freddie, he couldn't stop. He began to invent a new biography for himself. When new acquaintances asked about his parents, he evaded the answer or hinted at some aristocratic origin. Was he ashamed of his parents? Oh, that's too simple an answer. He loved them madly. But he understood, in the world of rock and roll, in the world he was so eager to enter, there is no place for humble Zoroastrians with their traditions and prayers. He protected them from his world, and he protected his world from them. It was a heartbreak he hid behind cynical jokes. Every time he came home to Gladstone Avenue, he took off the Freddie mask and became the obedient Parsi son again. He lived a double life. By day, he was a flamboyant student in tight jeans. By night, a quiet guy eating mom's curry and listening to dad's lectures about finding a real job. Imagine the tension. Every minute, every second, he feared exposure. What if his cool college friends saw his father? What if they found out he wasn't an exotic Persian prince, but just a poor immigrant? This fear drove him forward. He had to become so bright, so blinding, that no one would dare question his exceptionality. He began to paint, not on paper, on himself. He lined his eyes with black pencil. He started wearing women's blouses. Why? To shock? No. To distract. It's a classic illusionist trick. Look at the bright handkerchief in the left hand, while the right does the work. Look at my painted nails. Look at my feathers. Look at my outrage. Just don't look in my mouth. Just don't look into my soul. Just don't ask where I'm from. But the more he tried to become English, the more he realized he never would. And then he made a genius move that flipped the chessboard. If I can't be one of them, he decided, I will become what they can never be. He stopped trying to fit in. He began to create his own race, a race of one. He began to act as if he were royalty in exile. He walked into a room and the air changed. He hadn't sung a single great song yet. He hadn't earned a pound from music yet. But he already behaved like a star who was simply temporarily broke. People laughed at him. Who is this peacock with crooked teeth? They didn't understand. They saw a clown. He saw the future. But there was one moment when the mask almost cracked. One day he saw Jimi Hendrix. It was a lightning strike. Hendrix was wild. He was free, and he was different. He wasn't white British, and he was a god. Freddie came to lectures with a broom instead of a guitar and mimed Hendrix's solos. Students twirled a finger at their temple. You're crazy, Bulsara. But in those moments, clutching the mop handle, Freddie felt the vibration. He felt that a power lived inside him that was bigger than his fear, bigger than his shame. But there was a problem: the voice. He knew he had the voice, but he was afraid to let it out, because to let the voice out means opening your mouth. And opening your mouth means showing Bucky. The circle closed. He created the character Freddie to hide, but this character demanded a stage, and the stage demanded he show exactly what he was hiding. It was a trap, the irony of fate. To become great, he had to expose his biggest complex. He tried singing in toilets where the acoustics were better and where no one could see him. He sang, and his voice bounced off the tiles, powerful, pure, crystal clear. In those seconds, he was happy. But as soon as the door opened, sound door creaking, he went silent. Silence. He became just Freddie again, the weird guy from the art department. He thought he found a way out by joining the band Ibex, then Sour Milk Sea. He thought, I'll just sing. I'll stand by the mic, and everything will be fine. But reality punched him in the gut. At the very first rehearsal, he realized that just singing wasn't enough. The microphone stand got in the way. It was a barrier. It was a crutch. In a fit of nervousness, trying to hide the trembling in his hands, he unscrewed the base of the stand and started walking around the stage with it, using it as a scepter, as a spear, as a phallic symbol. This wasn't invented by choreographers. This was panic. Pure, uncontrolled panic turned into art. He moved so fast so that no one would have time to examine his face. He was a whirlwind. He was chaos, and people liked it. They saw audacity in it. They didn't know they were seeing fear. And that was when, in the dirty pubs of Liverpool and London, Freddie realized a terrible truth. The more he pretends, the more they believe him. The more brazen the lie, the more plausible it is. He realized that Farrokh Bulsara was of no use to anyone. The world needs a monster. The world needs an idol. And he was ready to kill the remains of Farrokh to feed this monster. But he didn't yet know that the hardest test was ahead. He changed his name. He changed his style. He changed his walk. But inside him still sat a little boy, waiting for someone to say, "We love the real you." But no one said it. Everyone loved the mask. And the mask began to grow into the face. Meat to meat. Blood to blood. Freddie grew stronger. Farrokh grew weaker. But he was still alive. And he was going to give one last fight. This is the epicenter of style, the place where fashion is born. But if you look in the corner of a small clothing stall, you won't see a style icon, but a skinny guy with crazy eyes trying to sell a pair of worn-out boots. His name is Freddie, still just Freddie. He works as a salesman alongside Roger Taylor, the future drummer of Queen, but in his head, he isn't selling clothes. He is selling tickets to a show that doesn't exist yet. You think this is a story about a poor student working for food? No. It was a laboratory. It was here, among hangers with velvet jackets and ostrich feather boas, that Farrokh Bulsara conducted the most complex operation of his life. An operation without anesthesia and a scalpel. A soul transplant operation. He understood one thing that others didn't. In 70s London, talent was worth nothing. There were thousands of talents. Everyone could play guitar. Everyone could sing. To survive, you had to become not just a musician. You had to become a myth. And Freddie began to build this myth with manic obsession. He started lying. At first, it was a small lie. "Where are you from, Freddie?" Pause. Dead silence. In that second, his fate was decided. Tell the truth? Say, "I'm from Zanzibar. I'm a refugee?" No. That would kill the magic. And he answered with that casual aristocracy he learned by copying the manners of expensive boutique customers. "Oh, darling, it doesn't matter. I was born to be here." He erased geography. He erased his past with an eraser, leaving white spots in its place that anyone could fill with their fantasies. But the lie required scenery. Farrokh was a modest guy who was afraid to even look at a girl. Freddie had to be a sexual predator, and he began to create a second skin. He put on tight leotards that left no room for imagination. He painted his nails with black varnish on his left hand. Only on the left, because that raised questions, and questions mean attention. He started wearing women's fur coats. You think it was a challenge to society? You think he wanted to declare his orientation? You are mistaken. It was armor. The more outrageous he looked, the fewer people looked him in the eye. Clothes were a distraction maneuver. Look at my sequins. Look at my platforms. Look at my varnish. Just don't look inside. Just don't see the frightened boy there. And then comes a turn that changes everything. He finds his queen, Mary Austin, a quiet, modest salesgirl from the Biba store. She was the only one who saw through this armor. She saw Farrokh, and it scared him to death. He loved her, but her gaze was an X-ray. "You don't have to pretend with me," she said, and he froze. Because if he stops pretending, the whole structure collapses. He thought love would save him, but love became a threat to his creation. He was torn between the desire to be loved for who he is and the need to be who he wanted to become. And he made a choice. He chose the mask. He began to distance himself from Mary, turning their relationship into just another part of the legend, a beautiful story for the press, while inside, he was lonelier than ever. But the personality change operation required a final touch: the name. Freddie was just a nickname. He needed a surname that sounded like thunder, like an explosion. Bulsara, too ethnic, too soft. He needed something dangerous, and he found it in Roman mythology. Mercury, messenger of the gods. But not only that, Mercury is quicksilver, liquid metal, toxic, elusive, shape-shifting, shiny, and deadly dangerous. In 1970, when he officially announced to the band that he was changing his surname to Mercury, Brian May looked at him doubtfully. "Are you serious?" Freddie didn't smile. He looked at them with his new, cold gaze and said, "I am not just changing my name. I am changing my destiny." At that moment, Farrokh Bulsara was officially declared missing. Freddie Mercury took his place. It would seem the transformation is complete. He created the perfect character. He has a name, he has a style, he has a band. But there was one detail that ruined the whole image. One dagger sticking out of his perfect painting. The teeth, 4 extra teeth, they hadn't gone anywhere. They still protruded, forcing him to cover his mouth with his hand. And now that he had become Mercury, this deformity became unbearable. He was a god with a flaw, and fate threw him a temptation. He got his first money, not huge, but enough. And a doctor appeared, a real dentist, who told him, "Freddie, this is solvable. A few extractions, braces, minor surgery on the palate, 6 months, and you'll have a Hollywood smile." Imagine this moment. You are sitting in a chair. Before you is a man offering to rid you of the main nightmare of your life, of what you were teased for in school, of what makes you shy to laugh, of what prevents you from kissing. All you have to do is say yes. Freddie sat in this metaphorical chair. He wanted it. God, how he wanted it. He dreamed of a perfect smile. He imagined walking on stage and not hiding his face. He was one step away from agreeing. It seemed a happy ending was near. But then a voice sounded in his head. Not the doctor's voice, and not Farrokh's voice. It was the voice of his gift. "But what if," whispered this voice, "what if the magic lives right here, in this incorrect palate, in this extra space?" Doctors assured him the surgery wouldn't affect his voice. But Freddie was paranoid when it came to his music. He believed in the mysticism of sound. He believed his body was a temple, even if that temple was built with errors. And he got scared. Scared not of pain, scared of becoming ordinary, scared that along with the crooked teeth, that unique resonance that made windows rattle would disappear. And he stood up. He looked at the doctor, covered his mouth with his habitual trembling hand, and said, "No." Do you understand what he did? He voluntarily chose to remain a freak. He chose eternal shame for the sake of eternal sound. It was an act of self-sacrifice unparalleled in rock history. He sentenced himself to a lifelong inferiority complex so you could listen to somebody to love. He decided, "Let me hate my face, but the world will worship my voice." This was the moment when Freddie Mercury finally defeated Farrokh. Farrokh wanted to be beautiful. Freddie wanted to be immortal. But this victory had a price, a terrible price. Having refused to fix his appearance, he had to compensate for it with something else. He had to become so grandiose that no one would dare look at his teeth. He started designing the Queen logo. Look at it. It is a coat of arms. Lion, phoenix, crab, fairies. This isn't a rock band logo. This is the coat of arms of a royal dynasty. The band barely existed, no hits. They played in basements, but Freddie was already drawing them a crown. He acted as if they were already stadium stars. He walked into managers' offices, slammed his fist on the table, and demanded, "I won't be a pop star. I will be a legend." People laughed. Who is this toothy guy with delusions of grandeur? They didn't know it wasn't delusions of grandeur. It was delusions of survival. He inflated his ego to the size of the universe to fill the void inside. He created a vacuum around himself, sucking everyone in. Brian, Roger, John. He forced them to believe in his illusion. "We are queen," he said, "and we will rule." But every evening, returning to his rented apartment, he walked up to the mirror, opened his mouth, and looked at his teeth. And in the reflection, he saw not a king. He saw a boy still standing at Heathrow Airport with a suitcase full of fear. He created a monster to protect this boy, but the monster demanded more and more food, and Freddie was ready to feed him everything, even his own soul. You think you understood his tragedy? No. You saw only the tip of the iceberg, because the scariest part was ahead. He gave up his face, he gave up his name, he gave up comfort. But he was about to give up something much more important. Love. Because gods cannot love mortals. Gods must be lonely. And Freddie had already begun to build his golden cage, from which there would be no escape. He thought he was controlling the process. He thought he was the puppeteer. But the strings had already begun to cut into his own fingers. The personality change operation was successful. The patient died. Long live the king. But the king was naked, and only he knew it. And now, ask yourself honestly, looking at the black screen of your phone, could you personally kill everything human in yourself to become a legend? Could you give up your family, your history, your face for the love of millions of people you don't even know and will never know? Freddie made this choice. He signed this contract in blood without reading the fine print. But here's the paradox that breaks the brain. He thought he was buying freedom, but in reality, he bought the most expensive, most luxurious solitary confinement cell in the world. Imagine the scale. Mid-70s. Queen is no longer just a band, it is a religion. They are filling stadiums. Hyde Park, Madison Square Garden, Budokan. Freddie walks on stage, and 100,000 people go crazy. He controls them with one movement of his little finger. He is a god. He is a monster of rock. In those 2 hours of the concert, he is the most alive being in the universe. He has no complexes, no fear, no extra teeth. He bears them, he screams, he reigns. But what happens when the spotlights go out? Have you ever wondered where all that energy goes when the show ends? It doesn't disappear. It turns into poison. Imagine this sound. The sound of a dressing room door slamming shut. A second ago, there was the roar of the crowd that made the earth shake. And now, a vacuum. Silence that rings in the ears louder than any amplifier. Freddie sits in front of the mirror. Sweat runs down his face, washing away the makeup. The adrenaline that just allowed him to fly turns into icy anguish. And in the mirror, he sees him again. Farrokh, the lonely, frightened immigrant looking at him from the looking glass with silent reproach. "You promised this would make us happy," the reflection's eyes say. "But we are just tired." You think he had friends? You saw photos of parties, champagne, laughter. It was an illusion. Freddie surrounded himself with an entourage. Ministers, as he called them. People who lived at his expense, laughed at his jokes, carried his suitcases. But was there at least one person who could simply put a hand on his shoulder and say, "Hey, Farrokh, how are you?" No, because Farrokh no longer existed to the world, and Freddie Mercury didn't need consolation. Freddie Mercury was invulnerable, and this invulnerability was his curse. He forbade people to see weakness in him. He created a distance no one could bridge. But there was one woman, Mary Austin, the very one to whom he dedicated Love of My Life. You think this is a song about happy love? Listen to the lyrics. Love of my life, you've hurt me. It is a song about loss. It is a song about how he destroyed the only real thing he had with his own hands. He confessed his bisexuality to her, though in reality, it was a confession that he could no longer play the role of a normal guy. And their romance ended. But did he let her go? No. He did something much crueler to both her and himself. He bought her an apartment, right across from his house. From his window, he could see her windows. It was the Santa Barbara effect in real life. He kept her on the leash of his love, but didn't let her close. Why? Because Mary was the only living witness to the existence of Farrokh Bulsara. She remembered him without money, without fame, without a crown. She was his conscience. And he couldn't be with her, because near her, Freddie's mask slipped. But he couldn't be without her either, because without her, he would completely lose touch with reality. He called her in the middle of the night, cried, complained of loneliness, and then hung up and went to gay clubs in Munich or New York to seek oblivion in the arms of strangers. You think those legendary parties in Munich were fun? You think those orgies, drugs, and endless carnival were a sign of freedom? It was anesthesia. Freddie wasn't having fun. He was running. He was running from the silence. He was afraid to be alone with himself for even a minute, because if the music died down, if people left, the voice of the murdered boy began to sound in his head. So he filled his house with people he didn't even know. He gave them expensive gifts, Cartier watches, cars, just so they wouldn't leave, just so they would create noise. He bought their presents because he was sure it is impossible to love him for free. Who can love a monster? He asked himself, and answered, no one. But a monster can be feared, and a monster can be admired. That is enough. But is it enough? Look at his house, Garden Lodge, his fortress in the center of London. High walls, barbed wire, cameras. It was a palace of dreams, filled with Japanese antiques, paintings, carpets. But who was he building it for? He had no family. He had no children. This huge house was a mausoleum. He walked through these halls in a kimono, surrounded by his cats. Cats were the only creatures who didn't give a damn about his fame. They loved him just because. And he loved them more than people. He called home from tours to talk to the cats. Sounds cute, right? But think about it. The greatest vocalist on the planet, the idol of millions, the man everyone wants, finds understanding only with animals. It's not cute. It's scary. It is a diagnosis of his total loneliness. And here we come to the scariest moment of this part, the moment of truth, the 80s. Freddie is at his peak. He cut his hair, grew a mustache. He changed the image of the Persian prince to the image of a clone from the Castro. He began to look like a hyper-masculine male. But look at his interviews from those years. Look at his eyes. There's panic in them. Journalists ask him, "Freddie, are you happy?" And he starts acting. He waves his hands. He laughs. He says, "I'm rich. I'm famous. I have everything." But notice his hand. Sound. Camera click. The hand is at the mouth again. Even with a mustache, even in a leather jacket, he still covers his teeth. Farrokh hasn't gone anywhere. He is screaming from the inside. He tried to drown out this scream with work. He recorded album after album, went on tour after tour. He wore out his body. He got nodes on his vocal cords. Doctors said, "Freddie, you need to be silent. You need surgery." But he refused. "If I go silent, I disappear." He feared the pause more than death, because in the pause he became nobody again. He became a slave to his schedule, a slave to public expectations. Freddie Mercury became the jailer for Farrokh Bulsara, and this prison was built of golden bars. And now imagine the night, deep night at Garden Lodge. The party is over. The last guest has left, taking a bottle of expensive champagne and a story about how he drank with Mercury himself. Freddie closes the door. He is alone in the huge house. He goes to the bathroom, turns on the bright light, and begins to remove the mask. Not metaphorical. Real. He washes off the makeup. He takes off the mustache. Yes, sometimes he touched it up. He sees his skin aging. He sees the fatigue ingrained in his pores, and he sees his teeth. In the sterile whiteness of the bathroom, there are no fans, no applause. There is only a man who betrayed himself. In these moments, he realized a terrible thing. Freddie Mercury is a parasite. He sucked all the juices out of Farrokh. He took his personal life, his peace, his opportunity to be weak. Freddie Mercury is the greatest pretender. He fooled the whole world into believing he was happy, but he couldn't fool the one looking at him from the mirror. "You are the great pretender," whispered the reflection. "You are drifting in a world of your own illusions." But the worst part was that he couldn't stop. He became addicted to the crowd's love like heroin. He needed a fix. He needed to go on stage again to feel alive. He hated his fame, but he couldn't breathe without it. It was a vicious circle, a carousel of self-destruction, and he spun on it faster and faster until the centrifugal force began to tear pieces off him. He lost friends. He lost health. He lost touch with reality. But he continued to smile for the camera, covering his mouth with his hand. You think you know what loneliness is? Loneliness isn't when no one is around. Loneliness is when millions love you, but no one knows your real name. Loneliness is when you lie in a bed worth thousands of dollars, but you are cold because you are warmed only by the light of distant stars, not the warmth of a living person. Freddie Mercury was the brightest star in the firmament, but stars, as we know, exist in a vacuum. And in this vacuum, no one will hear your scream, even if you have a voice of 4 octaves. He thought this was the bottom. He thought it couldn't get any worse, that this spiritual emptiness is the price of success. But he was wrong. Fate was preparing a new blow for him, a blow that would force him to rethink everything, a blow that would tear off the mask completely, but not at all how he planned. He didn't know yet that his body, which he had exploited so ruthlessly, had already started the countdown. He didn't know yet that soon he would have to face the most important fight of his life, and this fight would not be for charts, and not for money. It would be a fight for the right to remain in memory, not just as a clown in a leotard, but as someone greater. But for now, he just turns off the light in the bathroom and goes to the bedroom, where only cats await him, and silence. The dead, heavy silence of Garden Lodge, London, Wembley Stadium, July 13th, 1985, 6:40 p.m. The heat is unbearable. The air melts over the heads of 72,000 people who have been marinating under the scorching sun for 7 hours. Behind the scenes, chaos reigns. Drugs, alcohol, egos the size of skyscrapers. Here, all the gods of the musical Olympus have gathered. David Bowie, Elton John, Paul McCartney, U2. But amidst this glitter and noise, in the corner of a dressing room, sits a man who looks like he is going to the scaffold. His name is Freddie Mercury, and he is scared to death. You've seen the recording of this concert 1,000,000 times. You know his every gesture, but you don't know what happened a minute before he went out. You don't know that Queen weren't supposed to be there at all. Bob Geldof, the organizer of Live Aid, invited them last. Why? Because in 1985, Queen were considered washed up. Dinosaurs. A band whose time had passed. Critics wrote that they were exhausted. The press hated them for the concert in Sun City in South Africa, which violated the cultural boycott of apartheid. They were outcasts, and Freddie knew it. He knew that this appearance on stage wasn't just charity. It was a trial, a public execution or resurrection. There was no third option. But there was a problem more serious than reputation: his throat. A few days before the concert, a doctor looked at Freddie's vocal cords and turned pale. "Nodes," he said. "Freddie, if you go out to sing, you could lose your voice forever. You need rest. You need silence." Imagine this choice. On one scale, the career of your entire life, the opportunity to prove to the world that you are still the king. On the other, The risk of going silent forever, becoming a mute singer, a living corpse. What did Freddie do? He told the doctor to go to hell. He drank a glass of vodka to cauterize the fear and put on his armor. Not a royal cloak, not silks, and not feathers. On this day, he chose the clothes of a street fighter, a white tank top, faded Wrangler jeans, Adidas boxing shoes, and a studded armband on his bicep. This wasn't a star's costume. It was a uniform for a fight. He went not to sing. He went to kill. 6:41 p.m. Brian May and Roger Taylor are already on stage. Freddie runs out last. Notice his walk. This is not the walk of a human. It is the run of a predator released from a cage. He crosses the stage in giant leaps, wielding a sawed-off microphone stand like a spear. He runs to the edge of the ramp. 72,000 people look at him. Dead silence. A second of silence that lasts an eternity. In this second, Farrokh Bulsara inside him shrinks into a ball. He remembers his teeth. He remembers his vocal nodes. He remembers that the world considers them losers. But Freddie Mercury takes a breath. A deep breath with his diaphragm, expanding his chest so much that it seems the tank top is about to burst. He sits at the piano. Bechstein. Black, shiny, cold. He puts his hands on the keys, and here happens what we have been telling this story for. Remember the dagger? Remember his hand, forever covering his mouth? Remember his shame? In this moment, before the eyes of 1.9 billion viewers, that's 40% of the Earth's population at that time, Freddie Mercury commits an act of suicide of his complex. He opens his mouth, wide, unnaturally wide. He bares his 4 extra teeth, his malocclusion, his deformity. He doesn't hide them. On the contrary, he puts them on display. Because he knows a secret the doctors don't know. These teeth are his resonator, his bone amplifier. He hits the first chord. Mama! And this sound covers the stadium like a tsunami. It's not just a voice. It is pure, distilled pain passed through electricity. Does his throat hurt? Surely. Every sound comes with blood, but he doesn't stop. He uses this pain as fuel. He sings Bohemian Rhapsody, and 72,000 people sing along with him. But that was only the beginning, because next happens what scientists still cannot explain, the effect of mass hypnosis. Freddie gets up from the piano. He takes the microphone, and Radio Gaga begins. You've seen these shots. A sea of hands, clap, 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 synchronized. 72,000 people turn into a single organism. Who controls this organism? The man in the white tank top. He didn't ask them to. He didn't rehearse it with them. He just raised his hand, and they obeyed. He clenched his fist, and they fell silent. At that moment on the Wembley stage, there was neither Freddie nor Farrokh. There was pure deity, energy that has no name. But the most shocking moment comes during the vocal improvisation, the famous I-O. Freddie screams a meaningless set of sounds into the crowd. I-O! The crowd returns the echo to him. I-O! He complicates the task. De-da-dee-da-dee-da-dee-day-o. The crowd repeats. Do you understand what is happening? He is forcing 72,000 British people, prim, reserved folks, to scream gibberish. He plays them like a giant instrument, and at this moment, the BBC cameraman points the camera at his face in a close-up. Look at this shot. Pause the video if you need to. What do you see? You see sweat. You see crazy eyes. But look at his mouth. It is open. The teeth are bared. And on his face, there is not a drop of shame. For the first time in his 38 years of life, Farrokh Bulsara is not ashamed of himself. For the first time, he feels beautiful. Not because he fixed his bite, but because he realized his flaw is the source of his power. His voice, amplified by this mistake of nature, is now uniting the planet. He won. He killed his fear right there on stage in front of billions. 20 minutes. That's exactly how long Queen's performance lasted. The organizers gave them the same timing as everyone else, but these 20 minutes changed the history of music. Elton John, who was supposed to go on after them, stood backstage, pale with rage and admiration. "You son of a bitch," he told Freddie as he came down from the stage. "You stole the show." Freddie just smiled, and in this smile, there was no hand at the face. He walked down the corridor backstage, soaked through, gasping for breath, with a blown voice, but he walked like an emperor who had just conquered the world. But here is the question that makes the heart clench. What did Farrokh feel at that moment? That immigrant boy? He felt relief. For the first time in his life, his two personalities, the frightened refugee and the almighty rock god, merged into one. The conflict disappeared. The war ended. For 20 minutes, he became whole. He proved to his father, who considered his occupation unserious, that he wasn't just a clown. He proved to Britain, which called him a pocky, that he is its king. He proved to himself that his deformity is a gift. It would seem like a happy ending. Credits. Curtain. The hero defeated the dragon and found himself. But life is not a Hollywood movie. Life is a cruel screenwriter. Freddie didn't know that this triumph was a farewell gift from fate. He didn't know that this was the peak, after which a rapid descent into the abyss would begin. He stood there backstage at Wembley, drinking water, hugging Brian May, laughing, showing his teeth, and thinking that now everything would be fine, that now he was finally free. He thought he had defeated time, but time had already started the countdown. While he sang, "We are the champions," a ticking time bomb was perhaps already in his blood, or it would start ticking very soon. We don't know the exact date, but we know one thing. This day, July 13th, 1985, became the day when Freddie Mercury was more alive than anyone on this planet. He burned himself to the ground in 20 minutes to light up the world, and the world answered him with love. But this love, this ocean wave of adoration, was enough only to drown out the pain for a short time. When the adrenaline subsided, when he returned home to Garden Lodge that night, the silence returned. But it was different. It wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of completion. He did what he came into this world for. He justified his existence. He justified his murder of Farrokh. But the price he had to pay for this greatness was still ahead, and the bill for this triumph won't come by mail. It will come in the form of a purple spot on his skin that he will notice one morning in the mirror. The very mirror that reflected his fear for so many years and was now preparing to reflect his end. But that is another chapter, a chapter where the king will have to take off his crown and meet eternity face to face, without makeup, without a microphone, and finally without fear. London, Kensington, November 24th, 1991, 6:48 p.m. Outside the windows of the Garden Lodge mansion, the November darkness thickens, cold and damp as death itself. Inside the house, it smells of medicine, expensive lilies, and irreversibility. In the center of a huge bedroom, on silk sheets, lies a man of whom only a shadow remains. His body, once a bundle of pure energy capable of firing up a stadium, now weighs less than his stage costumes. His skin is covered with Kaposi's sarcoma spots. He is almost blind. He can barely speak. But if you think despair reigns in this room, you are mistaken. Something else reigns there, something that frightens and fascinates at the same time. Absolute icy control reigns there. Freddie Mercury died just as he lived, according to his own script. 2 weeks before this moment, he committed an act that doctors called suicide, and he called liberation. He refused medication. He stopped taking AZT, the drug that kept him alive. He kept only painkillers. Why? You think he gave up? No. It was his last rebellion, his final fuck you to the disease that tried to dictate terms to him. I decide when the show ends, he seemed to say with every breath. He took away AIDS' right to kill him. He chose to leave on his own. But in these last hours, as consciousness drifted between worlds, something strange happened. The great pretender, The man who spent 20 years creating an impenetrable mask began to take it off, layer by layer. The makeup was long gone. The mustache was shaved. The crown lay somewhere in the corner. And who remained? Do you expect to see a broken old man? No. On the deathbed lay a boy. That same boy from Zanzibar, Farrokh Bulsara. He returned. He broke through the concrete slab of fame, through millions of pounds sterling, through the legend. Only the closest were in the room. Mary Austin, Jim Hutton, Peter Freestone, and his parents, Jer and Bomi. They sat by the bed, holding their son's hand, and in that moment there was no Freddie. There was no rock star. There was a son looking at his mother with his huge, dark eyes. The very eyes that had seen stadiums, but now sought only his mother's face. He whispered something. The voice was weak, but it held intonations the world never knew. It wasn't a stage growl. It was the babble of a child. He returned home without leaving the room, and here happens a turn that forces a rethink of his entire life. The dagger we spoke of at the very beginning strikes the final blow, the will. Freddie left clear instructions regarding his funeral. What do you expect from the King of Rock? A lavish procession through the streets of London? An orchestra playing The Show Must Go On? A coffin studded with diamonds? Live broadcast on the BBC? Logical, right? After all, he loved pathos. He loved the show. But Freddie Mercury ordered a ceremony to be held according to the ancient Zoroastrian rite. Dead silence. Imagine the shock. The man who hid his origins for years, who changed the subject when asked about religion, who created an image of a depraved hedonist, in his final hour demanded that Parsi priests be brought in. He demanded that prayers be read over his body in the Avestan language, a language dead for thousands of years, the language of his ancestors. Why? Why this final gesture? Was it repentance? Or was it the last, most grandiose irony? Neither. It was a confession of love to the boy he killed in 1964. Freddie Mercury was a costume, and now that the work was done, the costume had to be taken off and hung in the closet. Freddie wasn't dying. Freddie is immortal. He remained on tapes, on vinyl, in digital. Farrokh was dying, and Farrokh had the right to leave as his grandfathers and great-grandfathers left, in white robes, to the monotone chanting of mobeds, without cameras, without fans, only with God, whom it turns out he never stopped believing in. November 27th, West London Crematorium. Morning, cold. The coffin is carried into the hall to the sounds of Aretha Franklin's "You've Got a Friend." But then the music stops. Two priests in white muslin robes enter. They don't look at Elton John, who is crying in the front row. They don't look at David Bowie. They don't give a damn about their fame. For them, Farrokh Bulsara lies in the coffin. They begin to recite prayers. Strange, guttural sounds, alien to the English ear, fill the space. Ashem Vohu. Truth is the highest good. In this moment, the circle closed. The boy, who was ashamed of his name, forced the most famous people on the planet to listen to prayers in the language of his shame. He forced Britain, which once called him a Pocky, to bow its head before his culture. It was his final victory. Quiet, invisible, but absolute. He didn't deny his roots. He smuggled them through his whole life, hiding them under layers of sequins, to reveal them at the very end as the main trump card. And now, remember his teeth. Those 4 extra teeth. He took them with him into the fire. He never fixed them. Even when the disease destroyed his body, even when beauty faded, his smile remained the same. That same incorrect, ugly smile. Why is this so important? Because it is proof. Proof that he never truly betrayed himself. He could change his name, hairstyle, lifestyle, but he kept a physical reminder of his essence. His teeth were the anchor that kept his hot air balloon from flying off into the stratosphere of madness forever. They reminded him every morning, "You are Farrokh. You are who you are." When the coffin disappeared behind the curtains of the crematorium, the world outside exploded in grief. But inside reigned peace. Mary Austin, fulfilling Freddie's last will, took the urn with the ashes. And here begins the final mystery. No one, absolutely no one except Mary, knows where he is buried. Freddie didn't want his grave to become a place of pilgrimage. He didn't want fans digging up the earth, trying to steal a piece of their idol. He feared desecration. He wanted peace. You think he is buried under the cherry tree in the garden of Garden Lodge? Or maybe his ashes are scattered over Lake Geneva? Or did he return to Zanzibar? We will never know. And therein lies his genius. He left us the music, but took himself. He didn't give us the right to own his bones. He left us with a question that has no answer. But look at his statue in Montreux. Bronze Freddie stands on the shore of the lake, raising his hand in his signature gesture of a winner. Head thrown back. He looks into the sky, and if you get closer, if you look at the bronze face, the mouth is open. The teeth are bared. He is still singing. Even in metal, he refuses to be silent. So who won this lifelong battle? Freddie or Farrokh? The answer is simple and complex at the same time. Both. Freddie Mercury became the shield that took all the blows of fate, all the hatred, all the dirt of fame, so that Farrokh Bulsara could live this life and return to God pure. Freddie was the bodyguard, and he did his job perfectly. He died protecting his client until the last breath. The story of Freddie Mercury is not a story about music. It is a story about the price we pay to be special. It is a story that each of us wears a mask. Some have it made of cheap plastic, some of diamonds. But under any mask, there always hides a frightened child who just wants to be loved. Not for achievements, not for the voice, not for money, but simply for existing. Freddie found this love, but he didn't find it at Wembley Stadium, and not in the bedrooms of lovers. He found it the moment he stopped running, when he looked death in the face, smiled his imperfect smile, and said, "I am not pretending anymore." Today, decades later, we listen to his voice, and now, knowing this story, you will hear something else in it. You will hear not only triumph, you will hear a crack. You will hear the sound of breaking armor. And it is this sound that makes him great. Not the octaves, not the hits, but his humanity, his pain, his fear, which he turned into gold. He is gone, but the dagger remains. His music is an open wound that will never heal. And every time you turn on Bohemian Rhapsody, you are not just listening to a song. You are present at the confession of a man who killed himself to become immortal. And he succeeded. Look at your life. Is there something in it that you are as ashamed of as Freddie was of his teeth? Something you hide, but which is actually your main strength? Write in the comments. Let's tear off the masks, at least here, in memory of the man who wore the heaviest mask in history. I am waiting for your stories.